Vicious bikers threaten a stranger at a bar. His identity leaves them shaking. The dimly lit bar was filled with the usual crowd, hard-drinking men and women nursing their beers, the faint sound of clinking glasses mixing with the soft hum of a jukebox in the corner. The scent of stale beer and cigarette smoke hung in the air, a familiar odor for those who frequented places like this. But tonight, there was an edge to the atmosphere. It felt different, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand up. The bikers had arrived. 6 men, all wearing leather jackets with patches that signaled their allegiance to a local motorcycle gang, had walked in together. They were loud, imposing, with their thick beards, tattoos, and bandanas, clearly used to being feared. They didn't hesitate as they made their way to the bar, their boots thudding heavily against the wooden floor. The bartender gave them a wary look but didn't say a word. He knew better than to start trouble with men like them. The gang took their seats at the bar, their eyes scanning the room for anyone who might catch their attention. But they weren't looking for trouble, not yet. Tonight, they were just here to drink, to unwind after another long ride, and to remind everyone that they were the ones who ran this town. The man sitting alone at the far end of the bar, however, caught their eye. He was a stranger, sitting quietly with a glass of whiskey in front of him, his coat draped over the back of his chair. His face was unreadable, his posture relaxed, but there was something about him that didn't sit right with the bikers. He didn't belong here, and they weren't the type of men to let something like that slide. One of the bikers, a large man with a thick beard and a dark tattoo running down his arm, leaned toward his friends. His voice was low, but loud enough for the man to hear. "Hey, check this guy out," he said with a smirk, his eyes narrowing. "Looks like he doesn't know where he is." Another biker, a smaller man with a scar over his eyebrow, snorted. "Doesn't matter where he is. He's about to find out the hard way." They all laughed, their voices gruff and full of malice. The stranger hadn't even noticed them yet, lost in his own thoughts, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But he was about to. The first biker stood up, his boots scraping against the floor as he made his way over to the man at the end of the bar. The others watched with eager anticipation, leaning back in their seats, clearly expecting trouble. The stranger looked up as the biker approached. For a moment, their eyes locked. The biker's expression was one of mockery, but the stranger's eyes were calm, unreadable, almost as if he had been expecting this. "Hey there, friend," the biker said, leaning on the bar in front of him. "You look a little lost. This isn't the kind of place you want to be hanging around, you know?" The stranger didn't respond immediately. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze still fixed on the biker. The air in the bar seemed to freeze, everyone watching the exchange closely. The bikers around the bar grew quiet, sensing that something was about to happen. "You're right," the stranger finally said, his voice low but steady. "I don't think I belong here, but I'm not the one who's lost, am I?" The biker's eyes narrowed, the smile on his face slowly fading. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with irritation. The stranger set his glass down slowly, his eyes never leaving the biker's face. "You're the one who seems to be looking for something," he said, his tone almost casual. "Something to prove, something to make you feel better about yourself. But trust me, you're not going to find it here." The biker took a step back, surprised by the stranger's calm demeanor. He was used to people cowering when he approached, begging him to leave them alone. But this man didn't flinch. He didn't back down. And that was something the biker didn't like. "I don't know who you think you are," the biker growled, his hand inching toward the knife on his belt. "But you're about to find out who we are." Before the biker could make a move, the stranger stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room fell silent. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the stranger might say something else. But instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. The biker's hand went for his knife, but it was too late. The stranger's hand was already on the bar, and what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a badge. A police badge, shiny, official, and very real. The room went deathly quiet. The bikers, who had been laughing and talking moments before, now stood frozen, their eyes wide as they took in the sight of the badge. It was the last thing they had expected. The stranger didn't need to say anything else. He let the badge speak for him. Slowly, the biker's hand fell away from his knife, and his face twisted in confusion. "You've got a lot of nerve, coming in here and starting trouble," the stranger said, his voice cold and commanding. "But let's be clear, you don't want to mess with me. Not tonight, not ever. You want to walk out of here, and you want to do it with your pride intact. Or you can stick around and see how this ends." The bikers were now visibly shaken, their bravado crumbling. The leader, the man who had approached the stranger, swallowed hard, looking around at his gang for support. But none of them spoke. They had all seen the badge and they knew what it meant. This wasn't a fight they could win. Without another word, the group slowly backed away, retreating to the door. The tension in the room didn't dissipate immediately, but it was clear the bikers had been outclassed. The stranger stood in the center of the bar, watching them go. He didn't need to say anything else. The message had been delivered. He had been right. They weren't looking for trouble, they were just trying to prove a point. And now that point had been made. The bikers had left the bar, but the tension still hung in the air. The hum of the jukebox, the clink of glasses, and the low murmur of conversation seemed distant now, as though the whole room had been holding its breath. Evelyn, the bartender, and a few regulars remained, casting nervous glances at the stranger, who now stood alone at the bar. He hadn't moved since the bikers had retreated. He stood there, quiet and composed, as if the altercation hadn't fazed him. His eyes were fixed on the door through which the gang had exited, his face unreadable. Evelyn, the bartender, wiped her hands on a rag, eyeing him from the other side of the bar. She had seen her fair share of trouble in this place, but nothing like what had just happened. The bikers were notorious, and their intimidation tactics usually worked. But this stranger, he had somehow turned the tables in a matter of seconds. "That was impressive," she said cautiously, approaching the bar. Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of respect in it. "You know, most people would have cowered in a situation like that. But you handled it like a pro." The stranger didn't immediately respond. He took a sip from his whiskey glass, his eyes still distant, lost in thought. He finally set the glass down and turned his gaze toward Evelyn. "I don't like to back down," he said simply, his voice calm but carrying an unspoken weight. "And I don't take kindly to bullies." Evelyn gave him a small, understanding smile. She'd seen her fair share of tough guys. But there was something different about him. The way he carried himself, the stillness in his demeanor. This wasn't a man who needed to prove anything. It was as if he simply was. After a moment, the silence in the bar became too much to bear. Evelyn cleared her throat and tried to change the subject, though she couldn't quite shake the curiosity that gnawed at her. You didn't really give them much of a chance to talk. Just whipped out that badge like it was nothing." The stranger gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Sometimes people don't need to talk. When they see something they weren't expecting, it usually shuts them up. Works better than a fight." Evelyn nodded. She understood. There were times when intimidation wasn't about fists or violence. It was about presence, about asserting control with a single move. And this man had done just that. She set the rag down on the counter, leaning on it slightly. "You know," she said, her tone now more casual, "you never told me your name. You just walked in, handled business, and walked right out without a word. Most people would have at least said thank you for getting rid of those thugs." The stranger's eyes flickered toward her, his expression neutral. Then, after a pause, he answered with the same calm tone. "Names don't matter. I'm just here to get a drink, not make friends." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, but she didn't press him further. She could tell he wasn't the type for small talk. "Fair enough," she said, pulling a clean glass from under the counter and filling it with whiskey. "Well, at least let me pour you another drink. You've earned it." He glanced at the glass in front of him, then back at Evelyn. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Something almost like amusement, though it was hard to tell. "I'll take you up on that," he said, his tone softening just a fraction. As Evelyn poured the whiskey, she couldn't help but notice the way the man's presence seemed to command the room. It wasn't loud or flashy, like the bikers had been. It was quiet, calculated. A still force that made the chaos seem almost insignificant in comparison. There was no mistaking it. This man had seen things, and whatever they were, they had shaped him into someone who no longer needed to prove himself. After a long pause, the stranger finally spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I didn't mean for things to go down like that. But when you've seen what I've seen, you stop putting up with people who think they can push others around." Evelyn studied him for a moment. She wasn't sure what he meant, but she could feel the weight behind his words. The way he carried himself, the scars he wore. He wasn't just a guy looking to blend in. He had a past, one that had clearly left its mark on him. "Sounds like you've had your fair share of trouble," she said softly, setting the glass of whiskey in front of him. He nodded slowly, but didn't elaborate. Instead, he picked up the glass and took a long sip, as if the question had already been answered. For a few moments, there was nothing but the sound of the jukebox and the quiet clink of glass. The door to the bar creaked open, and a man stepped in. Another regular, judging by the way he walked straight up to the counter without glancing around. He froze when he saw the stranger sitting there, his eyes narrowing with recognition. The man didn't approach, but it was clear he knew who the stranger was. "You," he said in a low, guarded tone. "I know you." The stranger didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from his drink. "Not here for trouble," the stranger muttered, his voice colder now. "Just a drink." The regular didn't seem convinced, but after a tense moment, he gave a stiff nod and turned away. The tension in the room hadn't lifted, but it was clear that the stranger wasn't someone to be trifled with. Not even here, not even in a place like this. Evelyn watched the interaction carefully, her curiosity piqued. There was more to this man than she had first thought. Whatever he had done to make the bikers back off, it wasn't just luck. He was more than just a stranger looking for a quiet drink. As the night wore on, the bar began to fill with more people, but Evelyn kept her eyes on the man. There was something about him, something that didn't sit right with the others, something that made them wary. And though she couldn't figure it out, she knew one thing for sure: he wasn't just any ordinary man. The night was far from over, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The hours passed slowly in the bar. Evelyn continued her shift, moving between the bar and the few customers that trickled in. But her thoughts were never far from the stranger who had caused such a stir. He hadn't made a move to leave, and there was an aura about him, an impenetrable calm that made everyone else uneasy. He had barely spoken to anyone since the confrontation with the bikers, though he occasionally glanced around the bar, as if observing the room without truly engaging. His glass remained mostly full, and the air around him seemed to hum with a quiet tension. Around midnight, a new group of patrons arrived, 3 men dressed in dark jackets and leather boots. They were unremarkable in appearance, but there was something about them that caught Evelyn's attention. As they walked into the bar, she noticed their eyes flicking toward the stranger. She watched them for a moment. They were clearly sizing him up. One of the men, taller, with a scar along his jaw, approached the bar. He stood there for a moment, looking over the stranger from a distance before turning his attention to Evelyn. "You seen that guy before?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, keeping her voice neutral. "The one sitting at the end of the bar? He's new around here, as far as I know." The man looked at the stranger again, his eyes narrowing. "He's not just some guy," he muttered under his breath. "You don't walk into this town and sit in a bar like that without raising some questions." Evelyn felt a chill run through her, but she didn't let it show. "I don't ask questions about my customers," she replied smoothly. "Everyone's got their own reasons for being here." The man didn't respond immediately, but he clearly wasn't convinced. His eyes lingered on the stranger for another long moment before he nodded. "All right," he said, his tone tightening. "Just keep your eyes peeled. He's not who he says he is." Evelyn wasn't sure what to make of that, but she could tell that the man's unease was genuine. Something was off, but she wasn't about to push it. She had learned a long time ago not to ask too many questions in a place like this. The trio made their way to a table near the back, casting occasional glances at the stranger. Evelyn's gaze, too, drifted back to the man sitting alone at the bar, his face still unreadable, as though he had no care for the growing tension in the room. Minutes later, the door to the bar opened again, and another figure stepped inside. This time, a woman. She was tall, dressed in a dark jacket that didn't quite match the usual bar attire, her face stern and determined. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, and they landed on the stranger without hesitation. Evelyn watched closely, a chill running down her spine. There was something in the woman's demeanor that suggested she wasn't here for a casual drink. The woman moved swiftly through the bar, her heels clicking against the floor as she walked straight toward the stranger at the end of the bar. There was no hesitation in her step, no sign of uncertainty. She knew exactly who she was here for. The stranger didn't flinch when she arrived in front of him. He didn't even look up at her, though he could surely sense her presence by now. "You're here," the woman said, her voice low but with an edge of command that made Evelyn's heart skip a beat. "I wasn't sure you would show up. I should have known better." For the first time, the stranger looked up, meeting her eyes. The air around them seemed to shift, the silence heavy and thick. It was clear that this wasn't a random encounter. These two knew each other, though what their relationship was, Evelyn couldn't yet understand. The woman's eyes flicked to the other patrons, taking note of the quiet, nervous energy in the room. "You've caused quite a stir," she remarked, her tone wry but cold. "But then again, you always do." The stranger didn't seem bothered. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving hers. "I came for a drink," he said quietly. "Nothing more, nothing less." The woman studied him for a moment, then shook her head, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Always so careful with your words. But you can't hide forever." Evelyn could feel the heat in her chest as she watched them, her curiosity burning with every passing second. She wanted to know what was happening, who these people were, and what their connection to the bikers, and to this town, really was. But she didn't dare interrupt. The woman leaned in closer to the stranger, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "They're getting closer. It's only a matter of time before they figure out what you've been up to." The stranger's expression remained unchanged. "I can handle it," he said, the weight of his words making her pause. "And when it's over, they'll wish they never came." There was a long pause. Evelyn, caught in the middle of this strange interaction, felt the eyes of the other patrons on her. She could tell they were all wondering the same thing. What was going on? Who were these people? And why was everything suddenly so tense? Finally, the woman straightened up, her eyes scanning the room one last time before turning her attention back to the stranger. "This isn't over. It's just getting started." With that, she turned and walked out of the bar without another word, leaving the stranger sitting in silence, his eyes still focused on the empty space where she had been. Evelyn stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to process everything. The mystery was deepening, and she could feel herself being pulled further into it. Who was this man? And what was it that had brought such a strange and dangerous energy into her quiet little bar? She glanced around the room. The bikers, the regulars, and now these newcomers. It was clear that something much bigger was unfolding. And whatever it was coming for them all. The door to the bar closed with a soft thud behind the woman, leaving an eerie silence in her wake. The tension in the room was palpable. Evelyn could feel the weight of the stranger's words still hanging in the air, thick with meaning. The regulars had slowly started to return to their conversations, but there was no mistaking the unease that clung to the room. Something was about to change, and Evelyn could feel it in her bones. The stranger at the bar remained unmoved, his attention finally shifting from the door to the whiskey in his glass. His demeanor was unchanged, calm and collected, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this man had seen things that no one should have to see. The way he carried himself, the way he shut down everything around him. He was more than just a patron in a bar. He was a man with secrets. Unable to ignore her curiosity any longer, Evelyn approached him again. She kept her distance, standing just a few feet away from where he sat, her gaze never leaving his profile. She could tell he was aware of her presence, but he didn't acknowledge her, as though waiting for her to speak first. "Who was that woman?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart beat faster as the words left her lips. The stranger didn't look at her at first, his eyes still on the amber liquid in his glass. He took a slow sip before setting it down, his fingers tracing the rim, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he wouldn't answer at all. But then, as if making a decision, he spoke. "Someone from my past," he said quietly. "Someone who knows too much." Evelyn leaned in a little closer, her curiosity bubbling over. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice lower now. "You seem like you're running from something. Or someone." The stranger met her gaze then, his eyes dark but not angry, calm, yet intense. "Maybe," he said simply, "but I'm not running. Not anymore." His words lingered in the air between them, thick with meaning, and for a moment, Evelyn could only stare at him, trying to piece together the puzzle that was this man. Everything about him screamed mystery, his confidence, the way he commanded attention without saying a word, the way his eyes held a story that no one else seemed to know. "You don't look like you're from around here," Evelyn continued, her voice softer now. She wasn't sure why she was so drawn to him, but something about the mystery of it all made her unable to walk away. "I haven't seen anyone like you in this town before." The man took a deep breath, his eyes flicking over her shoulder for a brief moment, before he looked back at her. "I wasn't planning on staying long," he said, his tone measured, but there was something in his voice, something that didn't quite add up. "But life has a way of pulling you into things you can't escape." Evelyn watched him carefully, the pieces falling into place. "So, you've got a past that's coming for you." Her voice was quieter now, almost a whisper. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It was a worn photo, yellowing at the edges, and he set it down on the bar between them. Evelyn glanced at it. It was a picture of the man from years ago, but this time he was in uniform, standing with a group of soldiers. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a man from out of town. This was someone who had been involved in something much bigger. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was starting to realize that there was much more to this man than just a biker brawl or a casual drink. The stranger's face tightened as he looked down at the photo. "My old team," he said, his voice rougher now. "We were part of a special forces unit. We were involved in things that most people will never know about. Things I'm not proud of." Evelyn's mind raced. She had heard rumors over the years, stories of government operations, shadow wars fought in the dark, men who came back from those wars scarred, physically and mentally. But she had never expected to meet someone like this. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft with the weight of the question. The man took another sip of his drink, his eyes flicking toward the door, as if he was deciding how much to share. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice low and distant. "We were betrayed," he said simply. "Somewhere along the line, things went wrong. People we trusted turned on us. And now, those people want what we took, what we uncovered. They don't care about the past. They want it now." Evelyn felt a chill run through her. "And they're coming for you?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded slowly, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "They're already here." A shiver ran down her spine. "So, you're not just a stranger looking for a drink. You're running from something. From them." The man's eyes met hers again, and for the first time, Evelyn saw something like regret there. "Not anymore. I'm done running." His voice was harder now, filled with resolve. "I'm here to finish it." Evelyn felt the weight of his words settle around her, the implications heavy. This wasn't just some biker gang. This wasn't just some petty local issue. This was much bigger than either of them, and somehow she had become part of it. She looked around the bar, suddenly aware of the eyes that were still watching from the shadows. The bikers, the regulars, everyone. It was as if they could sense that the tension in the room had shifted. They all knew, now, that the man sitting at the bar wasn't just another stranger. He was a man on a mission, And wherever that mission led, the storm was coming with it. Evelyn swallowed hard, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. The man's eyes softened, just for a moment, before he looked away toward the door again. "Now," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination, "we finish what was started. And if anyone stands in the way, they'll regret it." The following night, the tension in the bar had reached a boiling point. Word had spread quickly, whispers in the corners, eyes casting nervous glances toward the stranger at the bar, who now seemed more a part of the room than ever before. The bikers, the regulars, everyone who had been watching from the shadows knew that something was about to happen. The man who had once been just a quiet stranger was now a force to be reckoned with. He had shown them the tip of the iceberg, and everyone in the bar was waiting for the rest of the story to unfold. They could feel it in the air. Danger was closing in. Evelyn had spent the evening watching the stranger closely, trying to process everything he had said. He wasn't here for a drink. He wasn't here for a fight either, not in the way the bikers thought. He had a mission, one that involved people far more dangerous than any local gang could ever be. And those people were already closing in on him. Evelyn had hoped the stranger's story was just that. Stories. But the fear in the eyes of the regulars, the growing unease, told her that his words were real. And now it was too late to turn back. She was in it now. The door to the bar creaked open, and the silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn's eyes darted to the entrance, heart pounding in her chest. A group of men stepped inside, 3, maybe 4, all wearing dark coats, their eyes scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. They didn't make any attempt to be subtle. They were there for a reason, and it was clear they weren't here for a drink. The stranger was already on his feet, his hands sliding into his jacket, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto the newcomers. The calm, almost casual demeanor he had worn earlier was gone. In its place was a cold focus that seemed to swallow the entire room. One of the men, the tallest and broadest of them, stepped forward, his eyes locking with the stranger's. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. "We need to talk," the man said, his voice low, the threat clear in his tone. The stranger didn't flinch. He stood firm, his eyes cold as ice. "I don't think there's anything left to say." The man smirked, and his companions flanked him, closing in slowly. "There's always something left to say," he replied. "The question is whether you'll listen." Evelyn watched, her body tense with anticipation. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the beginning of the end. She had known it the moment the strangers walked in. It was all coming to a head. The man who had been speaking raised his hand, signaling his men to stop. "You've been a ghost for too long," he continued. "But you can't keep running, not now. Not when we're so close." The stranger's jaw clenched. "I'm not running, but I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've fought for, either." The tension between the two men crackled in the air. The bar had fallen completely silent. Even the bikers, once the loudest voices in the room, had fallen still. They all knew what was coming. Without warning, the man lunged at the stranger, pulling a knife from his jacket. The stranger was faster. He sidestepped the attack, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. It was over in an instant. The stranger didn't stop there. He disarmed the second man in one swift move, tossing him aside with an effortless throw. The third man, now panicking, rushed toward the stranger, but his move was sloppy, too slow. The stranger's fist met his jaw with a sickening thud, sending him crashing to the ground. The bar remained frozen, no one daring to move or speak. The bikers, once confident and threatening, watched wide-eyed as the stranger took control of the room. The leader, still on his feet, stared at the scene in disbelief. "You," he began, but his words faltered as he realized that the man standing in front of him was not someone to mess with. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The stranger stepped closer, his voice low but filled with authority. "No, you don't know who you're dealing with." He leaned in, his gaze piercing the leaders. "I'm the man who's going to end this. And if you're smart, you'll walk out of here and never come back." The leader's face twisted with anger, but he made no move to fight. Instead, he took a step back, signaling his men to retreat. Slowly, the three men backed away, their eyes never leaving the stranger until they reached the door. "Don't make the mistake of thinking this is over," the leader spat, his voice bitter. The stranger watched them leave, his posture still tense, but his gaze unwavering. He turned back to Evelyn, who had been watching the entire confrontation in stunned silence. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. He met her gaze, his expression softening, and gave her a small nod. "It's over now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The bar remained eerily quiet, as if everyone was waiting for the storm to pass. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice shaky but filled with admiration. "Who are you?" she asked, her eyes wide with the questions she had been holding in for so long. The stranger gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "A man who's just finished what he started." And with that, he turned and walked out of the bar, leaving behind only the sound of the jukebox and the lingering sense of tension that had marked the night.